It came off on a rough start, but a commendable effort. And I'm confident that it can only get better from here on out. Right? Hey, I'm sure a good amount of you were waiting a good while for this one. Fair warning, this video won't be entirely positive. The last thing I want is to give off the impression that I hate the Persona 2 duology. Because I really don't. I just hate Persona 2 Innocent Sin. So let me begin by saying that Persona 2 fans are really bad at selling their own game to people. A lot of the selling points that were fed to me when I was still kinda new to the series were mostly just slights against the other games in the series. I guess the most common thing you've probably heard is that Persona 2 is better than your favorite modern Persona game at one specific thing or another. If you're a Persona 3 fan, you've probably been told that 2 has a better written story. If you're a fan of Persona 4, you've probably been told 2 was more forward and progressive. If you're a fan of Persona 5, you've probably been told both of these things, and that Persona 2 isn't tone deaf like 5 when it comes to handling sensitive topics. If you're someone who wants a Persona game with an adult cast, some bitch in your ear has probably told you to play Eternal Punishment, and it's like, yeah, no shit. We know that game has an adult cast. I think people mean a new Persona game with an adult cast. I went and asked my audience what kind of stuff they heard about Persona 2 before playing it, and two very common anecdotes kept coming up again and again. That Persona 2 was less riddled with those cringe anime tropes, and that it's darker and more mature than the modern Persona games. All of these statements are a load of shit, by the way. And when BS circulates for long enough, people will just start to believe it and perceive it that way. It creates a misconception of the Persona 2 games for people who haven't played them yet, and probably just don't know any better. This is actually pretty relevant to the game's story and themes, so the fact that the fandom has fallen into the exact traps the games warn the player about is either some form of poetic justice or just plain sad. Not only am I going to be debunking all of these myths, but I'm also going to talk you through these games concurrently, side by side, to see what these games are really all about, how they parallel or contrast each other, and how much more eloquently they actually handle all of those things than the rest of the series. And lastly, I just want to say that spoilers for all the mainline Persona games are fair game for this video. Realistically, most of you have probably played the modern games before even thinking about playing Persona 2, and at that point, I might as well go all the way and throw Persona 1 spoilers in there too. So join me as I commit my gravest sin of scrutinizing sin. Wait, what? So the reason I wanted to cover these games side by side is because the way they're set up just really lends themselves to this format. The two games take place in two different timelines, one where the world is led to its destruction, as well as the death of a main cast character, causing Tatsuya and the remaining cast to rewrite the timeline at the cost of ever meeting to prevent said character's death. The other timeline is the aftermath of that decision taking place in the revised timeline. You now take the perspective of Maya, who is alive and well in this timeline, but she's slowly unearthing her old memories from the past timeline, and trying to prevent another similar world-ending cataclysm. The parallels are fully intentional, and thus end up working pretty well for this type of analysis. This also saves me the trouble of making a video for each Persona 2 game, in the same way every other Persona retrospective on the internet does it. But enough context, let's actually get into it. Alright, so it's no secret that Persona 2 is praised primarily for its story. It's literally the first thing you'll see when googling any reviews for the game, and it no doubt will be the first thing that is mentioned. I also think it's fair to say that many people in this fandom would say Persona 2 might have the best story out of any Persona game. At least the ones who have played it. Now, whether or not story is good is kinda subjective. And that's your obvious cue that everything I'm saying in this video is subjective, and I'm not trying to impose my perspective as more true than yours. For me, personally, I think a story's success is based on how sufficiently it explores its themes and gets its message across. Okay guys, I'm gonna let you in on a little something. For this video, the biggest obstacle for me in particular has been, what is Persona 2 Innocent Sin even about? Obviously, I know what happens in the story. I mean more, what's the game really trying to say to me, you know what I mean? No, seriously, this game's plot just loves to move forward without giving you time to even process anything. And it's not even because of anything of huge importance happening. It's usually because the game has the characters do a thing, then immediately after they're just like, okay, time to go do the next thing. It's so caught up in going through the motions that every climactic moment just ends up being a passing thought. You'd think the moral of the story would have been the one thing that stuck with me after playing Innocent Sin for the first time, but when deciding to come back to this game and trying to remember my thoughts on it from way back when, I realized it never crossed my mind what the game was actually trying to tell me. After replaying the game for this video, I think I know why. It's because Innocent Sin tries to cover a lot of themes, but doesn't explore enough of any of them. That's not at all how I felt playing Eternal Punishment, however. In that game, the mature themes are probably what stuck with me the most, and the story flowed very well. So what happened? Well, first I should probably try to narrow down the themes of each game. For Innocent Sin, the most consistent themes I noticed were the obvious rumors, pursuing dreams, and daddy issues? I'm not joking, like, I know it's a pretty common thing across the entire series, but apparently this game actually wanted to make it a point. Every main cast character in Innocent Sin has beef with their father. Except in the case of Tatsuya, it's his brother, who kinda just sees him as a burden. Now, having a bunch of themes is great and all, but how well does the game tie all of them together? I think this is where things start to get a little muddled. The best line of logic I could think of was this. Pursuing dreams, ideals, and wishes of the sort will often come with many obstacles, the biggest one being societal expectations. I guess within those expectations, the first person who's gonna get in your way is going to be your father or parent figure. You sort of see that with your first encounter with Eikichi's dad, opposing his punk rock aesthetic and telling him how he's going to take over this sushi joint without really giving him much of a choice. Eikichi, of course, wants to be a rock star like every other kid in the 90s. Lisa's dad, you don't really see that. I don't think he's ever opposed to Lisa's dream of marrying Tatsuya, or gives a fuck. I think it's more him imposing his ideals onto her. Maya's dad was the reason she decided to pursue her career. Jun was ashamed of his father. I would too if my dad was writing doomsday apocalypse stories. But after Jun's dad dies, the main villain slips in and takes on the form of his dad. Or rather, a dad who Jun could brag about to his friends and such. That was his wish. So while there is plenty of evidence showing the correlation between these two themes, guess what? Only the last two examples are ever shown to you in the story. The interactions with Katsuya, Eikichi's dad, and Lisa's dad are all missable. So unless you went out of your way to talk to all three of them, most of the symbolism behind the final boss's design just goes over your head. To be completely honest, if we discount the optional and quite frankly limited appearances of most of the fathers in this game, this theme might as well not even be there because it'd only be vaguely present for two characters. And of course we have rumors, which might as well be synonymous with the Persona 2 duology at this point. Part of the story premise is that rumors that are widespread enough in Sumaru City will become true in reality. It's meant to represent the rampant spread of misinformation and how that fucks with people. This is the one I had the most trouble figuring out the connection with the other themes, and the main thing I had to ask my Persona 2 enthusiast friend about. To quote my friend here, rumors are society's instability and the wild extremes to which the collective hysteria of humanity is able to change history. It kinda makes sense. Revisionist history is started by simply spreading a different version of events until it sticks. Then it just kinda becomes established as history. It's not as simple as just spreading a rumor, but I think maybe rumors are more of a stand-in for propaganda. Apparently the rumor of the Führer and the Last Battalion was based on an actual conspiracy that people used to spread. I know the jokes are tired and overdone, but at the same time, I still have trouble taking this seriously myself. Probably because they did nothing to make him look intimidating, they just give him a goofy, shit-eating grin. Hey, future bubbletea here. So my friend Nam's Compendium was telling me about a Xenoblade Chronicles 2 interview he was reading for a video of his. Apparently Katsura Hashino was in this interview, and he just casually mentions the real reason Persona 2 is about rumors. It was because there were a lot of rumors about the company going around, and the Persona 2 team did not like that. I really wish I knew that before editing this entire video, but there you have it. In the end, we came to the conclusion that rumors are ultimately just a device to advance the plot with basically no effort. Literally every time the game needs something to happen, they could just make it happen. Now, there's certainly a lot to dig into with these ideas, but most of what I've laid out doesn't feel like its full potential was tapped into. These themes also lack cohesion. Take Persona 5 for example. The themes of that game, corruption, attaining true freedom, and an aesthetic for rebels and outlaws of literature. Those aren't all technically the same, but they're pretty adjacent to each other and work off each other really well. The other Persona games are like that too, thus making it easier to write a story around them. Innocent Sin kinda has that if you squint hard enough, but ultimately feels like it's trying to say a lot without getting enough of each theme across. But then you get to Eternal Punishment. While a good amount of the symbolisms and significance of Innocent Sin's themes kinda went over my head, Eternal Punishment is where they really stuck with me. Okay, so right off the bat when you start the game, every character and their grandmother decides to fucking lay out all the themes of the game for you within the first few minutes. Gotta make sure you know this is the punishment game, while the last one was the sin game. This is like some Yaldabaoth scene type shit, but at least that happened at the end of the game. This is like if they ruined Persona 3's opening scene by adding unnecessary dialogue that was only put in for a compromised visual novel style version, but they kept it in their 3D remake. Shit. Thankfully, most of the game isn't like that. Basically, Eternal Punishment takes Innocent Sin's themes and turns them on their head. Innocent Sin delved into dreams and ideals. Eternal Punishment goes into the opposite. Not feeling like you'll ever make it, giving up on your dream in pursuit of something that might feel more important in the moment. Feeling aimless and without a real goal to pursue. Or maybe failing at your goals time and time again. Now, a lot of people will say these themes are inherently mature and adult-oriented, but honestly, I think these experiences are just more relatable for most people, especially in today's day and age. Most people, including kids, don't know what they want to do with their life in the long run. I think what Eternal Punishment is trying to get across with its adult cast is that even adults are still trying to find their place in the world. I know I sure am. While we're on the topic of adulthood, I feel like this theme in particular is played up a little too much by the fandom. Like I said, the themes of this game might resonate more with adult audiences, but then people gotta do that thing they love to do with video games and reduce them to just that one broad and innocuous term. Persona 3 is the death game, Persona 4 is the truth game, Persona 5 is the society game. But again, just because the game features an adult cast doesn't mean these themes aren't applicable to the younger teenager audience of, well, the rest of the series. The same is true for the opposite. Hell, the adult audience of Persona 5 is bigger than its under 18 audience. I think it's safe to assume that for the rest of the series. Thus, the themes of the other games have to be presented in a way adults can appreciate them too. Don't you think the same should be applicable to the other way around? I came across a post online of someone complaining about Persona 2 fans being called pretentious, and to be clear here, most of them aren't. But it's easy to come off that way when you describe Eternal Punishment as the adult game. Well, damn, that kind of insinuates you think the other games aren't as mature. And if you've played the other games before, you know that's just not true. The weirdest thing about this is whenever the game does explicitly bring up the topic of adulthood, it's done in the most abrupt and preachy way possible. As if the adult cast and adult aesthetic wasn't enough to tell the player how adult this game is. Like, you'll have a heartfelt scene between Tatsuya and the grown-ups. I get the characters trying to help out Tatsuya because trying to restore order to the multiverse isn't really a burden that anybody could handle on their own. But then sometimes they'll feel the need to interject with this out-of-pocket taking responsibility for the children shit. Look, it's been a long time since my childhood, but one thing I remember for certain is that kids do not like being talked down to. I know I'm certainly one to talk. To any of the 15-year-olds watching this who have never seen a game manual before, but for a video game that people will actually take seriously, it's not the best way to get your message across. The message isn't for the kids, it's for adults! Is it really a good lesson to teach adults to condescend children? I suppose you could argue that this parallels Innocent Sin's father theme. This is probably just how adults viewed children back in the year 2000 when this game came out, I don't know. There's only one scene in particular where the subject doesn't come off as forced or preachy, and that's the train scene. You know the one. It's the one that every fan of this game loves to post online. Don't get me wrong, it's a really good scene. I just feel like it gets gassed up a little too much. The context does not enhance the moment at all. The gang hop on a train, and they kinda have a moment of reprieve. They ask Tatsuya about what they were like in the other timeline. Then, out of nowhere, Tatsuya just drops the question. Is it hard being an adult? I understand Tatsuya was probably just trying to make small talk, but the subject ended up being deeper than he was expecting. If you were to ask this question to a parent, they'd have a much more straightforward answer for you. The problem with this scene is everything else I mentioned earlier. Ironically enough, knowing the full context of this scene actually weakens its impact for me. Knowing that this is the most natural occurrence of the subject that is brought up, it really does come off more deep when people just post it online out of context and are like, wow guys, he asked if it's hard to be an adult and then everyone was dead silent. They're just like me. I'm an adult and my life is hard. Hey, to longtime viewers, did you know that my channel was made for adults? As if the type of life stories I share, the topics I cover in my videos, and the fact that I literally made a video saying I grew up with the wrong 6th generation console didn't already give away that I'm a dude in my mid-20s. But guess what? I don't need to tell you that. I'm already confident that people within my desired age range for these videos will just get what I'm saying. And to anyone under the age of 25, which is quite a lot of you, if you're able to find enjoyment in my videos too, that's great. I'm not here to lecture no younglings or be like, mid-20s problems, am I right? You know what, I think from now on I'll just randomly drop that I hate Zoomers every few videos or so, just to make the message clear who my content is for. Or I could just let the story speak for itself. I know every Persona game is guilty of this to some extent, but at least in the other games, whenever they bring up some theme or moral, it's actually relevant to what's happening in the story. Eternal Punishment handles rumors better in my opinion. The way rumors are utilized could also be considered an inverse from Innocent Sin, in that rumors were kind of ass-pully. They could basically be whatever they wanted as long as enough people believed it. The easy solutions to the problem would never stick with people, but the cause of their destruction? Sign them right up. In Eternal Punishment, the progression of rumors over the course of the story feels a lot more natural. Just like Innocent Sin, it all starts with one rumor, Joker's Call. This time, however, Eternal Punishment has most of its rumors either splinter off this one rumor or compound on top of it. Joker's Call starts off as a simple twist on the original rumor from Innocent Sin. Instead of calling Joker to grant your wish, you request him to kill a person of your choice. After encountering him the first time, Tatsuya tells Maya to spread a rumor that anyone with the Seven Sisters High emblem will be protected from Joker. Okay, just fuck the other school you have friends at, I guess. The same rumor continues to circulate around Sumaru City, solidifying it, leading to one of the villains, who is a renowned fortune teller, compounding the rumor by adding that not only will the Joker respond to your call, but the caller will also become a Joker. The fortune teller predicts something, everyone believes it, the rumor comes true because of the curse on the city, and that just gives her words more credence for people to believe the next thing she's going to predict, perpetuating the cycle. It feels a lot more strategic on the villain's part than Innocent Sin, where the villains are mostly taking advantage of already existing legends, using them as rumors. It feels like the pieces are mostly just set up for them already. The Joker rumor being more twisted in this timeline than the previous one also parallels the inverse of the themes. Instead of Joker granting wishes, Joker is now a curse that people basically inflict on themselves. It's karma for taking someone's life, basically. However, what makes a narrative mean more to me is the characters it's driven by. I can say with utmost certainty that Persona 2's casts are a step up from Persona 1's. That, unfortunately, is not saying much. A running theme that you'll notice with these characters is that Innocent Sin treats its characters more like plot points rather than a character who continually stays relevant throughout the entire plot. Okay, I didn't realize we were on that Persona 4 shit before Persona 4 even came out. I'm gonna talk about the guy characters first, and then I'll get into the whole topic of female characters in Persona a bit later. Yeah, that's gonna be a fun discussion. Tatsuya is one of the strange cases of a Persona protagonist. In Innocent Sin, he's just your standard self-insert protagonist. You do get to sort of decide certain facets of his character. The game remembers what choice you choose at the beginning of the game during your counseling session with the Persona 1 reference. He's supposed to represent teenage angst and uncertainty as made apparent by his shadow. Are you really pursuing the path you want, or just what society expects you to do? Then Tatsuya goes through half a character arc off-screen in Eternal Punishment, largely in part because he's not the silent protagonist of the game this time. I know there's an additional Tatsuya scenario added in the PSP version that explains his journey leading up to him finally joining you for Endgame. Honestly, when it comes to old protagonists coming back, Tatsuya was done right. Limiting his appearances and leaving the player curious what he's been doing and what his involvement with this whole debacle is. Making him fight solo for most of the game, showing he's retained his growth from Innocent Sin, and making him look badass while doing it. Tatsuya's tragic flaw, though, is him trying to take on the burden of restoring order to the two timelines solely on himself. The kid is in over his head trying to take on more responsibility than he can handle because he felt he didn't really have much of a choice. Hell, I'm older than Tatsuya at this point, and I feel like that sometimes too. Tatsuya might be a contender for my favorite character in Eternal Punishment, not as a protagonist though. Ikechi was done dirty, he deserved better. So his character arc starts off pretty strong. You got a guy who comes off as really shallow and narcissistic, but it's all just to cover up his insecurities. Like most narcissistic people, honestly. He hates fat chicks and loves to own people by pantsing them.
And I would have thought the algorithm could tell that I'm not into fat bitches, okay?
But this is actually a projection of his own traumatic memory of once being overweight and pantsed in front of the girl he liked. That very same girl, years later, became overweight, while Ikechi lost weight, and took on a punk rock look. He ironically made fun of the girl he loved so much without even realizing it was her. Upon finding out this girl, Hanakoji, was the same one he knew, he immediately shows concern for her getting hurt and drops the whole shallow facade. Hanakoji, humiliated that she was found out, runs away. And that's all you get, until near the end of the game. You want to know how long that first part of his arc took? Like, 1 dungeon. Let the record show that Persona 4 was not the first game to start this trend. His character arc wraps up within a matter of minutes too. Hanakoji reappears skinny again by joining the masked circle and having her wish granted. You fight Ikichi's shadow, Ikichi declares that he would have loved her regardless of how she looked, and then they lived happily ever after, the end. Ikichi's the second most likable of the Innocent Sin cast, by the way. Yeah, that does not bode well. Okay, I was about to move on to the Eternal Punishment boys, but then I remembered Jun existed. This is gonna hurt me a lot more than it hurts you. Jun Kurosu is probably the biggest letdown of this group because, well, I used to say he stopped being interesting the moment he joins your party. Now that I've replayed the game, I'd say the game just does an all-around horrible job at keeping my interest in this character. So Jun being the Joker should have been a really good twist, but it's one I found myself not really feeling the impact of as much as the game really wants me to. A big part of that is because of how unpresent Joker is throughout the story. Like, past the opening hour of the game, you don't see him again until after the twist is revealed. Most of the background you're given on this guy is through back-to-back flashbacks all contained within 1 dungeon. And it's not even entirely focused on him, it's more so fleshing out the whole group, moreover. Now, due to Jun joining the party so late in the game, and his huge lack of presences throughout the majority of it, all of his characterization and how he came to be Joker is explained to you in the final dungeon. They also explain some shit with him hating his parents. The deal with his dad is kind of important, but the stuff about his mom is honestly so insignificant, you could completely cut her out of the game, and it would not affect the narrative whatsoever. So Jun overcomes his guilt or whatever, but it feels unearned as hell. Once again, another instance of shoving things into one place because they didn't know where else to put it. So then what's the big deal then? Why do people like this character so much, and why is he, like, the first thing people mention about this game? It's because people ship him with Tatsuya. And you were very much intended to, for sure. So something people will rave about when it comes to Innocent Sin is that unlike those icky modern Persona games, this one has a good gay representation in the form of Jun. I mean, I guess? On the basis of just being a gay character who exists in the series, because there really aren't too many of those. I can't really argue with that, so I won't. But the relationship between Jun and Tatsuya feels very much like it's purely fan service. In fact, it actually is. So my buddy Nam and I have been gathering and collecting Persona developer interviews, and there were only 2 that I could find that actually acknowledged the Jun and Tatsuya relationship. Atlus straight up admits it was all for fan service in an interview in the back of a Persona 4 strategy guide of all places. It's kind of funny too, because they hardly talk about Persona 4 in this interview. In short, they said, yeah, we just did it to see if girls would like it. Hell, even the way Kaneko and Tadashi acknowledge it feels kinda weird. It really does come off like it's just a fan service thing, with the way they say Jun would want to assassinate Lisa for Tatsuya's heart, among other things. So what are you actually given in-game? The way the game itself describes Tatsuya and Jun's relationship, they seem to focus more on how they're similar to the point where they're like doppelgangers of each other. That is the least romantic description of a relationship I've ever heard. But wait! They told me you could romance him! It amounts to 1 dialogue choice. This is the only time you can really romantically acknowledge anyone. You can say you like Lisa, you can say you like Ikichi, you can say you like Maya, it's all the same. I also meticulously read through all the in-dungeon dialogue with the party members, and I could not find anything of note. Here's the thing though. Even if there is some other form of external media, or some obscure line of dialogue in the game that only occurs in a specific shop at a specific point in the game, it's not worth a shit to me. Firstly, necessitating some out-of-the-way optional dialogue to make a character feel complete is fundamentally no different than requiring a social link to do the same thing. In fact, that's even worse. At least social links are a core mechanic of the modern games, and therefore less out of the way, while still leaving plenty of neat little interactions outside of the main focus of their social links. Secondly, I shouldn't need external media to fix a character, and even then, this video isn't about the external media. This video is about the game. So I am going purely by the stuff that pertains to the games, those being what's in the game itself, and developer interviews. So, in the end, what we're left with is a very rushed character whose most defining trait is a romantic relationship that barely exists, and almost kinda feels like the fanbase had to fill in the blanks for them. Moving on to the Eternal Punishment boys, we got Katsuya. Yeah, there are a lot of characters in this game with similar names. Don't tell the fans that think having two Makotos is too confusing. Guess whose brother he is? That's right! Tatsuya! Wait, no, not that one. In Innocent Sin, this guy had like 2 lines of dialogue as an NPC. Guy says he can't relax unless he ties his brother to a tree like a dog. What a guy. In Eternal Punishment, he's actively investigating the Joker rumors. You'll notice a running pattern is that all of the Eternal Punishment cast consists of previously established characters, most of which played little to no role in the previous game's story. For a bunch of formerly one-off characters, they go pretty hard once they're actually given the spotlight. I mean, he's the protagonist's brother, who also happens to be a hard-boiled detective. You can't possibly waste the potential there. Despite his bad first impression in the last game, he proves himself to be a really good brother. Straight from the beginning, while he's investigating Seven's High, you can tell he's worried about Tatsuya. Even after Tatsuya reveals he's not the same Tatsuya his brother knows, Katsuya still considers him his little brother regardless. He holds a little resentment towards his father and brother. Katsuya gave up his dream of becoming a pâtissier to prove his father innocent, and had to take care of Tatsuya in his absence. This is only briefly explored, but I feel like his interactions with the other characters throughout the story were enough to characterize him, and he always felt relevant throughout the plot. Not something I can say for most of the Innocent Sin crew. Baofu is the foil to Katsuya, not a stickler for the rules like he is. Baofu is a wiretapper who has beef with the Taiwanese mafia. In Innocent Sin, he was this drunk guy in a flashback, and also some guy online who spreads rumors. Quite the considerable upgrade. I wonder what the thought process of choosing which side characters from Innocent Sin would be the main cast members for Eternal Punishment was. I guess Katsuya and Ulala were obvious picks, being directly associated with the main characters of the first game, but a random rumor mongerer of all characters? His introduction scene is pretty rad too. You go on the computer the way you'd normally meet him in Innocent Sin, and then he just appears in the same room as you out of the blue. Hey, maybe I'll give that a try someday for my epic face reveal.
That's never happening, don't kid yourself.
You will often see him and Katsuya's principles clash. The interactions between these two alone, whether just for banter or during a major story event, does far more to make them feel fully realized than the ones I've mentioned from Innocent Sin, where they're treated more like story pieces. Baofu's arc is your pretty standard revenge arc. The Taiwanese mafia killed his partner back when he was a public prosecutor investigating a money laundering case. Ultimately, his quest for revenge was rooted in survivor's guilt, as Baofu survived the incident and awakened to his persona after she was already dead. The arc wasn't much, honestly, but his portrayal was on point.
You're just a stripper in a police costume trying to pull me over, bend me down, and show me the way of Satan.
Nanjo, along with every other Persona 1 main cast character, is largely just there for fan service. Everything down to the return of Kandori too. I really don't have much to say about Nanjo himself other than he retained his character growth from the last game, which I can't say for a lot of other Persona characters. Nah, the real interest in choosing Nanjo as your 5th party member over Ellie is the lore. So Eternal Punishment was the first game to play around with the idea of experimenting on people to create artificial persona users, and the Nanjo group is helping fund this research, leaving Nanjo feeling responsible to stop it. Whoever kept in the detail of the Kirijo group being split from the Nanjo group, while also being responsible for artificial persona user experiments and expanding upon this same dilemma with Mitsuru's character, was on point. And also Ikichi was there, I guess. Alright, it's time for every Persona fan's field of expertise. Women. So you've all probably talked to that one person who's all like, Anta Kamiki was wasted potential because they zoomed in on her ass and that's antithetical to her character arc. And you're like, you know what? Fair point. So what kind of girl characters do you like, by the way? And then they point to these characters. Yikes. Persona 2 has hands down some of the worst female characters in the series, which is actually very contrary to popular belief. Most people are fond of these characters, as far as I've observed. I'm not trying to say they're unlikable, because at the end of the day, any character who isn't a vile person will be likable to someone. A likable character isn't necessarily the same thing as a fleshed out or nuanced character though, and that's the assertion I'm trying to make here. I think the case and point example is Lisa Silverman. I think it's worth bringing up the Lisa and An comparison here. This is one that I heard a lot back when I first got into the series. Both being Caucasian characters who are judged for their appearance in their homogenized Japanese setting, and both are pined over for their looks and foreign appeal. I asked my audience on both YouTube and Twitter who they thought was handled better. Most of the responses can be summed up by these few comments right here. This idea that An's character development was regulated entirely to one portion of the game, and doesn't get much else, and what I've got to say to that is, Lisa suffers from the exact same problem, just like Ikichi too. In fact, Lisa and Ikichi's dynamic is basically the same as any other bickering bro and girl character in the series. You know, the one-dimensional stereotype that every other instance of this trope gets accused of. But more to the point, Lisa's character arc is effectively about as long as Ikichi's, but it's padded out across 3 whole-ass dungeons. The first 2 just give you droplets of what her whole deal is, and then the third one actually follows through. Unlike Ikichi's arc, however, it leaves off at a pretty logical point to stop. But no, since everyone has to face their shadow, we get probably the most out-of-left-field trauma dump. The story never hinted at all at Lisa doing drugs or her compromised dating with older men. This is purely here for shock value and adds nothing to... wait. I feel like I've heard people say the exact same thing about another game. Also, can we just take a minute to acknowledge that Lisa's dream is just to marry Tatsuya? Sure, getting married is a long-term goal that a lot of people have, and that's great. But no independent person capable of thinking for themselves calls that their dream. Something like that is usually only part of that dream. If you were to ask someone what their dream is, and they tell you their dream is to get married and have kids one day, your first thought would probably be something like, okay, that's nice and all, but is there anything more to that? Being an idol wasn't her dream. It's just something her friends dragged her into, and she definitely didn't dream of becoming a proper Japanese woman like her father wanted. Tatsuya was always the end goal. Oh, and I turned her down, aww. Maya Amano is probably the least offensive case of the poor writing of women in these games. And that's after taking into account the dialogue about her massive jugs and the women can't drive jokes. Oh no. You know, so far most of my thoughts on this game since the first time I played have largely been the same, albeit more specific now. The sole exception of this, however, is Maya Amano. When I first played this game, I felt like there wasn't that much to her character.
I was wrong.
Maya might actually be the best of the female characters in Innocent Sin. She's introduced to you as a reliable adult figure for the main cast, and always tries to put on a positive attitude at all times to keep the team's morale up. She's also, like, the only character who's properly developed. I mean, her arc is the most evenly spread out throughout the story. It's established very early that she's scared of fire, but not overtly stated. It plants the seed so that her extreme reaction to much graver outcomes like Alba Park catching fire makes sense and doesn't feel out of left field. It's later shown in a flashback where her fear of fire is rooted from. Being the adult of the group kinda leaves a huge weight of expectation on you. You have to show the least weakness. Her positivity farce was just her way of hiding hers. But it's only through seeing Maya in her more vulnerable states that we learn more about her and understand her struggle. She was a kid too at some point and has her own fair share of trauma. And then the writers just go and kill off the best female character. No, we can't have any good female characters in Innocent Sin. We forbid it. Not even like it comes as a huge surprise either, considering they give you a whole ass prophecy that just spoils it. They try to use this other character who is also named Maya as a red herring, but come on, who remembered this character? The one issue I have with Maya is that I wish they established the whole deal with her father leaving for a journalism gig and dying earlier instead of shoving it into the final dungeon. It felt like they couldn't figure out where else to put it. In Eternal Punishment, she becomes the silent protagonist, so instead of reiterating her already existing character traits and story arcs, the game focuses on immersing the player in her point of view. Both her and the player are revisiting familiar places and unearthing old memories from the other timeline, with the first domino to set off this effect being Tatsuya, the boy with all her answers. Yukino is here because she's working with Maya's magazine scoop investigating the rumors. Yukino goes through the exact same character arc she did in Persona 1, but with this other girl now. Her rationale is exactly the same as in the first game. I used to be a punk, but now I'm not, so I need to help this person. She also has a thing for her partner in photography who is on screen a total of 2 times, but his death is meant to be this huge deal. They literally play the most depressing music ever while it happens. Also, let the record show that this man died because he really wanted photos of the ensuing battle, dying for the content, just like me right now. Her shadow does allude to stuff about how Yukino chose photography because she wasn't book smart enough to become a teacher like Miss Sayako, who was her role model. Again, just like most Innocent Sin characters, very last minute stuff. Then she just hands her persona off to Jun. That's it. Probably the exemplary model for the problem with how Innocent Sin characters are written. Although granted, she is only temporary. There's actually a bad case scenario where this moment feels way more earned. If you leave Yukino to mourn the death of Shunsuke, she won't be able to face her shadow, and after her shadow jumps off into the abyss, Yukino's psyche breaks and she essentially becomes an empty husk, her last wish being to give her persona to Jun. Ulala is a character I like, but I really wish I could like more, genuinely. She's probably the most relatable character in Eternal Punishment, but the ideas her character tackles just aren't explored enough. You know it's bad when she has to interrupt an entire scene where they're about to do something important to talk about her life problems. Actually, wait, that is kinda relatable. So, I get how she feels. Working so hard but not really feeling like they've achieved anything, or not having a real goal to pursue. This gets so bad that she uses the rumored Joker's call to get Maya killed. Whoa, slow down there. Am I missing something here? When exactly was the breaking point? Your best friend must have done something, like, really bad to have made you want to kill them. I mean, yeah, Maya did fall asleep while Ulala was venting to her. That would definitely peeve anyone, but like... I think the biggest issue is we're never really shown the magnitude of her resentment towards Maya. Like, they've known each other since high school, but that detail never really feels all too relevant. Maybe in the context of Maya having a habit of never listening to Ulala's problems compounded over the years, that kind of outburst would be more, well, not justifiable, but understandable. I will say though, the build-up to finding out Ulala called Joker to kill Maya was very well done. She clearly shows concern for Maya's safety and is antsy about something. Then later on, when overhearing the rumor that those who call Joker become Joker, she immediately shuts everyone out to prevent her from hurting anyone. The way they try to play it up like it was her ex-boyfriend she called Joker on was also a neat excuse for a little innocent sin throwback. Sadly, that is the peak of her character, and that happens pretty early in the game. They also really love to drill in the fact that she's ugly and can't get a man. I don't know if it's just because I'm getting older, but I think she's kinda hot. They also try to hint at her possibly developing a thing for Baofu, but like a lot of things in Persona 2, it feels really unearned. Unless you read all these out-of-the-way lines of missable dialogue. Finally, we have Ellie. Listen, I love Ellie. She's just as charming as she was in Persona 1 with her occult fixation, but her arc is basically just about her liking the protagonist, to a degree where she starts to parallel it in her head with her stalker's infatuation for her. I mean, good on her for realizing it. Both Nanjo and Ellie both kinda just dip after Mount Iwato without any grand departure, which granted is better than just an arbitrary deciding to give their personas away, so I appreciate that. And Lisa was there too for like a minute if anyone cares. Alright, so now that I've talked about all the female characters, can you tell me what they all had in common? All these characters have some sort of fixation on men. If you caught on to the pattern before I pointed it out, kudos to you, genuinely. Lisa is after both Tatsuya romantically and attaining his popularity. I find it a bit weird and even a little telling that people are just okay with Lisa calling Tatsuya pet names, or calling him her boyfriend on live radio, but they find characters like Rise calling the protagonist cool and awesome annoying. In fact, I'd say Lisa is way more persistent and overt and obsessive, while Rise is more like teasing when she's, really flirting. You also gotta love this part where the lead writer's self-insert character comments on Lisa's body. Yukina's growth sure as hell didn't come from this girl. Shinsuke was definitely supposed to be her motivation to keep moving forward. Ulala literally fails the Bechdel test upon her first line of dialogue in Eternal Punishment. A large part of her deal is that she's unappealing to men. I also just remembered Ulala's ex-boyfriend situation was in both games, and the way they just sort of low-key pair her with Baofu kind of feels like they did it out of obligation, because as we all know, no main cast woman can be without a male love interest. Ellie is just the most obvious example. I don't think I really need to reiterate myself. The only woman whose character arc isn't ruined in this manner is Maya's. Yes, she became a journalist because of her father, but that's actually kinda respectable. She doesn't do it because it would have pleased him if he were alive. It was out of respect for his death. And yes, her main motivation in Eternal Punishment is pursuing Tatsuya, and the game very obviously teases them as a potential item. You wanna know the difference between Maya and the rest of the girls we've talked about though? They actually give us a reason to give a shit about these two. Tatsuya and Maya across both games have had way more heart-to-heart moments than Lisa and Tatsuya, or Yukino and Shinsuke, and definitely more than Ellie and the Persona 1 protagonist. Those two get zilch. Tatsuya even kisses Maya if you beg him to take you with him to his world. That's way more than you ever get from Tatsuya and Jun, just saying. It's almost enough to make me look past the jokes about how she can't drive because, she's a woman. For games that are often touted for being ahead of their time, I don't know, I kind of feel like the female characters in Persona 2 aren't treated any better than in the modern games. Hell, I think it might even be worse. But by far, the worst characters in these games have got to be the villains. They're all hyped up to be these big tough guys, but lack the presence to really be the threats the story plays them off to be. Anna literally does nothing, and she's supposed to be a key character in Yukino's development. She becomes Yukino's self-appointed protector after Yukino gives up her persona, even though they've only talked like twice. Kinji is your typical boring henchman, but the way the writers try to get you to hate him is by throwing in the detail that this guy just happens to be a PDF file. This doesn't actually affect the story in any way at all. You could remove this detail entirely and it wouldn't make a lick of difference. He disappears for most of the game, and then they try to hype up his return at the end of the game just for you to find him dead. His status is so undeserved it's funny. Lisa has the gall to say that this guy was a formidable foe. Bitch, no he wasn't! He appears for like one room in Eternal Punishment, and that's it, by the way. Then we have Tatsuya Sudo. So this guy traumatized our main cast when they were children. We see a brief flashback showing the player a glimpse of what he did, but then shortly after that, he just drops the face reveal. Not only was that reveal not given enough time to set in for the player, it also kind of feels like it didn't settle in enough for the characters either. He also just dies right after that. They don't even fully remember the incident until the dungeon right after, where the full context of that traumatic event was revealed. And by then, he's dead, who cares? You could have made King Leo and the maniac who burned down the shrine 2 different people, and the impact would be effectively the same. You also only fight him once and never see him again. Guy literally disappears before you can really learn anything about him. Because there is more lore to him technically, it just never ends up mattering. That's just fan-freaking-tastic. In Eternal Punishment, however, things are a little bit better, albeit not by much. Sudo is actually the very first villain you encounter in Eternal Punishment. Unlike last time, we actually know the kind of stuff he's capable of before fighting him. I know, that's a wild concept. Also, the fact that you have to hunt him down in a mental asylum should already tell you this guy isn't safe to be around. The guy still dies the exact same way as in Innocent Sin, but at least it actually felt satisfying to beat him that time. Given all the previous context and Tatsuya temporarily joining your party to fight him being 40 levels higher than you, I'd say I was more invested here than in Innocent Sin. I'm not a huge fan of Wanglong Chizuru. I don't find her particularly interesting, but she at least has a bit more of a constant presence throughout the story. She's brought up immediately from the start of the game being famed for her fortune telling, and it makes sense that she would use her notoriety to push rumors being spread to achieve the New World Order's goals. And Kandori is back. He's about as interesting as in the first game. Actually, I'd argue he's even less interesting. Moving on. The Masked Circle and New World Order are both entities that hold a lot of influence over society, which is ultimately what leads to society's downfall. They do this by appealing to the public through trends which build up their popularity. The Masked Circle lures people in with promises of fulfilling people's wishes. The New World Order earns people's trusts with fortune telling, and using that to push rumors to make said rumors come true, and boost their credibility to spew out even more fortunes to be spread as rumors to come true. The New World Order is a tad bit more realistic though, as instead of incurring the wrath of Adam Hitman and starting an all-out war with them, the New World Order actually have a hold over the Taiwanese mafia, who have a hold over the police. I don't know man, New World Order just feels a bit more grounded and down to earth, even despite all the weird supernatural stuff they get involved with. I cannot believe I said that out loud. The villain groups themselves are pretty organized and get stuff done, but the individuals that make up said villain groups aren't particularly interesting in my eyes. Before I wrap up, I might as well talk about Nyarlathotep. He's basically just like any other Persona final boss character. He only exists in the final dungeon, and he's mostly just meant to represent the antithesis of the party's ideals. He's straight up the shadow of all humanity. It doesn't get more straightforward than that. Not much else to say there. You know, I've been talking my mouth off for a while now, and I just realized we still haven't even gotten into how these games play. Before I get a move on, I'd like to just give a shout out to my lovely patrons. If you'd like to support me financially, it costs as little as $1, and I can offer some perks in return, such as sneak previews and more in-depth updates on videos. You also get your name in the video, like these lovely people here on screen. If you can't or simply don't want to, that's perfectly fine. Just watching the video, liking, commenting, subscribing, and all that other junk already helps a ton and doesn't cost you a thing. Thanks for watching this far in, and now back to the video. In the same way Persona 2 is almost unanimously talked about for its story, it is almost never talked about for its gameplay. At least, it doesn't get talked about in enough detail. Even when someone does bring up the topic, the consensus is usually that gameplay is Persona 2's weakest suit. And that's it. I don't think anyone has ever really talked about what is fundamentally wrong with Persona 2's gameplay. Hell, even Persona 1 gets brought up more from what I've personally witnessed. And people will bring up many specific things about the gameplay they don't like. This is true for every Persona game. Except Persona 2. The discussion usually ends at, innocent sin is too easy, and eternal punishment is too hard. Which is honestly such a wild conclusion considering these games run on the exact same engine and game mechanics, and yet they seem to paint two completely different pictures. There is obviously something wrong here, and I feel like this is worth investigating. So I guess the first place to start is why the hell is Innocent Sin so easy? Both versions, by the way. Why is it so easy? Why is it being easy a bad thing? You guys are trying to kill me, aren't you? Okay, sit down and make sure to take notes, this will all be on the test. To me, the fundamental issue with Innocent Sin's gameplay in particular is that it literally does not matter. I wish I were kidding. You do not need to interact with or even think about the vast majority of mechanics in this game, because they will not at all impact your overall experience. Hell, it may as well not even be worth talking about. Which is probably why people just don't. It's completely justified. It's as easy as counting to 3. 1, 2, 3. When a game is easy because the mechanics are exploitable, that at least requires you to use the tools the game gives you effectively. That takes some amount of effort. You can at least argue there's fun to be found in just that. It meets the bare minimum. Persona 2 has a lot of different mechanics for the player to play around with, a whole library of personas to use, so many different combinations of character interactions for demon negotiations, using rumors to influence prices and equipment selection for shops, and it all amounts to nothing. You don't need that shit, and quite frankly, it's not gonna add much to the experience anyway. That's because every battle in this game is just autoplay. Having souped up personas and equipment is not going to change that at all. So what, the enemies are more dead? Cool, don't care. And what's worse, this is what the majority of your playtime is going to be spent on, not the story that everyone raves about. Those choices that determine whether you have to do a certain boss without a certain character or at all? Whatever man, it's just a time saver. It's funny because the moment you start to wear your starting personas thin, and you start to struggle for just a single boss fight, the game gives you your prime personas, just a free upgrade on the spot, given you made certain choices in the story. If you didn't, then don't sweat it. You're just straight up given your ultimate personas not too long after, if you found the Featherman masks in Mount Iwato. Trust me, they're not super well hidden or anything. You also have to equip Jun's starting persona against his boss in Aquarius Temple, which is probably what you were going to do anyway because as we've established, starting personas can carry you pretty far. Even if you do manage to miss all the ultimate personas, the game is still entirely possible to do with just your starting personas because of fusion spells. Not just for their raw power, but because casting them constantly will just randomly increase your persona stats. I remember when I first played this game. I remember the final boss actually pushing me to go out of my way to get new personas, carefully plan out my moves, and make sure I had at least one guy that was immune to all physical, because the boss had a Havoc-based instant death attack. It was the one fun boss in the entire game. And the PSP version just nerfs it completely. That instant death move never hit me once. I didn't bring enough SP items and it ended up turning into an hour-long slap fight. And I still won. Persona 5 might be easy, but that's because you played the game efficiently. You play Innocent Sin, and it's almost like a test to see how little you can use to weasel your way through the entire game. Maybe someone out there might find that fun, but I don't. So then what the fuck happened here? Now, let's talk about how those exact same mechanics result in what people widely consider the hardest Persona game. Potentially. I didn't find the PS1 release to be too terribly difficult. The only difference really was I had to change my Persona lineup every so often. Yeah, that's it. And it was infinitely more engaging than Innocent Sin's gameplay. Normally, that'd be the end of the story. But then I got curious about the PSP version's hard mode. I typically play every Megaten game on the hardest difficulty just because, well, that's how I've always played them. Yeah, even on my very first playthrough of Persona 3 back in 2017. When you push both the player and the game to their limits, it really emphasizes both the gameplay's strengths and weaknesses. Well, I can say with utmost certainty that hard mode is definitely hard. Not in a way that I really like though. Increased damage is to be expected, but being unable to escape unless you have Trifuri is something I've never really been a fan of. This also exacerbates a problem I have with this game. Getting new personas sucks. So, you know the flow of these Megaten games at this point, hopefully. You build a team, and if that team doesn't work out, then you assemble a new team and come back. In most cases, this doesn't really demand much of you. Just save your game and start fusing away until you come up with just the right team comp for the job. Now, in some cases, this may result in the need to grind. Whether it be for compendium funds, gathering fusion fodder, or grinding to the minimum level to fuse said demon. Sure, grinding might be the most obvious and straightforward option, but even in the PS2 era of Megaten games, there was plenty of wiggle room for skilled players to get by with minimal to no grinding. That's because normally, even before stuff like skill inheritance was introduced, demons came with at least decent skills straight out of the gate. Personas in Persona 1 and 2, they start off with one skill, usually a really bad one, and all of that persona's best skills aren't learned until much higher ranks. Skill cards are a thing, but the ones you acquire just through drops and treasure are pretty mundane. And the way you're supposed to unlock more at the skill card shop is through map completion, of all things. With this game's encounter rate and the number of pitfalls these dungeons have, no shot. And the really good skill cards like Medea Rahan are gotten through extracting them from personas, after you've maxed out their rank. That means every time you get a new persona, you basically have to raise it from the ground up. God forbid you're running a whole new set. Now that's 5 new personas you have to start from square one with. Plus any potential skill card you need to extract, that's yet another persona you have to grind and add to the pile. Now personally, I think people exaggerate a little too much about how bad grinding in RPGs really is. I'm not gonna hold it against a game for making me grind to beat 3 bosses throughout a 25-hour game, especially when those points are well spread throughout the entire game, and the grinding is pretty brief. The point where I personally start to see grinding as a problem is when the grinding starts to become a cycle. Like every so often you just have to grind new personas just to stand a chance against the random encounters. That's what Eternal Punishment's hard mode does. On normal mode, it's less a matter of difficulty and more a matter of not dealing chip damage and beating those bosses in a more timely manner. The normal mode experience is pretty average in difficulty, but the later game bosses are pretty spongy. Oh, and that's not even getting into the stupid way you acquire new personas. So, in the first Persona game, negotiating with demons did not actually grant you with that demon as a persona. What you got out of them was that demon's card, that could be fused with other demon's cards to fuse an actual persona you could use. Now, while this was somewhat of an odd choice, it was still reasonably workable. Well, I'm glad to inform you that Persona 2 did not improve or fix the fusion system. In fact, they straight up made it worse. This time, you don't fuse at all. In Persona 2, you summon personas from the Velvet Room using tarot cards of that persona's arcana. Does that sound neat? No need for complex fusion charts of this sort? Sounds more straightforward, right? Not really. It actually adds extra steps to the process. So let's say you have a persona you want to summon from the Velvet Room. It costs X amount of cards to get it. Okay, cool. You go out and find that exact demon in a random encounter, and you hit it off with them. You would think that demon would just give you enough cards to summon them, right? Actually no, it's more like 10 times the amount they give you. And you're not guaranteed to run into that enemy every encounter. Oh, but if you make the demons happy, they'll give you free tarot cards and increase your card output. It's not that bad. Well, now you've just defeated the whole point of the system. It no longer matters what demons you talk to. On top of that, you still have the issue of needing to rank up your personas every time you get new ones. As if that wasn't already enough of a penalty for experimenting. Now let's get into the combat. For Innocent Sin, I said all the battles were basically autoplay, and that's because the system was designed to be like that. Do you see the problem already? Persona 2's battle mechanics basically go like this. You select everyone's commands at the beginning of the battle, you commence the battle, and the battle will continuously flow until the player chooses to stop it to change anything. It sounds interesting in concept, and I even found myself enjoying certain battles. Most battles, however, do not manage to strike that perfect balance. In most cases, it's either using the exact skills on repeat until you win, or basically playing red light green light with extra steps. The latter is usually the case for Eternal Punishment boss fights, while the former is usually the case for random encounters in both games. Being able to stop the battle at any point is neat and all, but it gets really old really fast against these Joker fights. They'll use this skill called Old Maid. One of your party members is possessed by a Joker and will attack the rest of your party. But you're not going to know which one it is until after that character acts. The way to counteract this is to drop everything you're doing and have everyone set to defend. The one who doesn't continue defending upon getting their turn is the Joker, but they won't actually get to perform an action this way. Now imagine needing to do the same thing right before the boss's turn so that you can tank an otherwise deadly attack. Thankfully, defending is instantaneous, so you can just pick back up right after the bosses get their turn. But that's yet another set of menu inputs you have to enter. Now it doesn't feel so automated like it's supposed to. I'm gonna pull the most bubbletea move here, and make a comparison to Persona 3's tactics system. One day I'll shut up about this game, I promise. Anyways, Persona 2's battle system interestingly shares a few qualities with Persona 3's, excluding the entire one more mechanic that wasn't introduced yet, of course. You input all of your party members' commands through a single strategy menu, and you're given a turn chart to more wisely assign commands. The difference here is flow. Persona 2 tries to give battles a smooth flow by making them semi-automated, but then that makes the game too easy. When you make the battles more challenging, you have to be very careful with how you do it. Otherwise, you'll have to constantly break the pace of the battle to adjust the constant circumstantial changes. Yes, I know about the setting that automatically stops the battle every turn cycle to change commands. More often than not though, I find myself stopping the battle myself mid-turn cycle, for stuff like the defend exploit I mentioned earlier. So that's kind of a moot point. Persona 3 on the other hand is able to maintain a good pace and flows pretty damn well, while maintaining a little bit of those semi-automated qualities. How? By centering the battle around the protagonist. He is the one issuing commands. The turn cycle always starts on his turn. He is the focal point, the pace breaker, and where you formulate your strategy on a cycle-by-cycle basis, planning ahead instead of on the fly. In fact, this is what makes Persona 3 fundamentally different from all the other mainline Persona games. The fundamental flaw of Persona 2's combat is that it's not even really meant to be played, and that kinda goes against what a video game is supposed to be. at least in my eyes. I think the gameplay in this game is really just a formality. That much should be obvious with a battle system that's literally meant to play itself. Hell, even Persona 1 at least felt like they were trying to throw ideas at the wall and seeing what sticks. Instead of trying to create an innovative and engaging battle system, Persona 2 sets out to do the opposite, with a system that literally skips past all of that. It feels like it's all in the interest of just getting to the plot already. This is actual Persona fan syndrome, or generic game journalist mentality at best. But while I wrap up this rant about the battles, I think now's a good time to segue into the battle music. So the music in Persona 2 is pretty good. Since you spend most of this game on the battle screen, we might as well start off with the battle music. Between Innocent Sin and Eternal Punishment, I'd say I prefer the normal encounter theme of Innocent Sin and the boss theme of Eternal Punishment. I think the key factor in a good turn-based battle theme is confidence. This is something that's present in all of the encounter themes across the series. In the case of Persona 2, I definitely hear it more in Innocent Sins than Eternal Punishments. Eternal Punishments almost feels like it's being hesitant. Maybe that's the point, but it's not the route I personally would have gone with. Boss themes, on the other hand, it's the total opposite. I'm gonna be brutally honest with you. I hate the fucking boss theme in Innocent Sin. A lot of these boss fights are supposed to be super climactic points in the story, and yet the battle theme does not reflect this intensity at all. That shit puts me to sleep. Eternal Punishment's boss theme, however, does it right. Here's the general rundown of how a boss kicks off in both games. In Innocent Sin, it transitions into the battle music starts, then the characters have a bit of dialogue, then the battle finally starts. In Eternal Punishment, it catches you off guard. One moment you'll just be having normal, unvoiced dialogue, then everything on screen except the characters darkens, and then you hear this. Damn, shit just got real in a matter of half a second. It's like night and day. As for dungeon themes, very few of them actually stick with me. Couldn't recall to tell you what most of them sound like. The ones that did stick with me were mostly Eternal Punishment tracks. The song that plays at the sanitarium, while not something I'd listen to outside the game, sets the perfect tone and atmosphere. Like, this is some RPG Maker horror shit. Finally, we have character themes. Just like with Persona 1, every main cast character has their own theme. Something I wish the later games would do, but they're not based enough. Even Tatsuya, as a silent protagonist, has his own theme. It plays right as you receive a challenge and ransom letter showing exactly the kind of badass they want you to think he is. Some characters even have sad versions of their themes, and it really flips the switch on the mood perfectly. It's a complete 180 turnaround. God, I love Persona music. It's just a shame I can't love Persona 2 just as much. I really hope that I'm not giving off the impression that I'm trying to ruin people's enjoyment or dissuade people from trying the Persona 2 duology. Hell, I basically told you to go play the game first before watching this video. I don't know what else you want me to do. I really don't want to be one of those guys who says, just wait 10 years for a remake. The only goal of this video was to refute all the misconceptions and point out all the double standards that circulate about these games, and apply the same level of scrutiny that people apply to modern Atlas titles. Something that I don't really see a lot of outside of surface level gameplay criticisms. Persona 2 is definitely just as guilty of a lot of the same things people give the other Persona games flack for. I think people are very susceptible to giving this game a free pass in a lot of areas because of its age and because not as many people play these games. The underdog status, if you will. I'm not accusing anyone of just liking these games because they're niche. I am simply disagreeing with the actual reasons they give me and providing the best case for my perspective as possible. Not in hopes to change anyone's minds or sway the discussion in my favor, but simply to communicate why I feel the way I do. We all have our predispositions. There's no one on this earth that doesn't have at least a little bit of bias. This includes me. The problem I see these days is people trying too hard to be objective, or pretend their opinions are the objective, or quantify the quality of art as objectively as possible. That's boring. It's not fun for either of us unless you love feeling like you're above some people. I think instead of trying to deny or mitigate our biases, we should acknowledge them and explain where those biases are rooted in. You may never change anyone's mind, but that shouldn't be the point. You can at least give them the ability to understand where you're coming from. If a person isn't even willing to do that much, they're not worth your time. As for a potential remake, I don't really know if it would necessarily fix the game for me. First of all, I don't care. Personally, I don't have any plans to replay Innocent Sin at any point, and Eternal Punishment is playable enough as it is. That being said, I'm not opposed to a remake. By all means, if people want one, let them have it. That does raise concerns over whether the artistic integrity is upheld or not, and the original essentially being replaced by this new version. The original will always exist, sure, but which version is the one Atlas clearly wants you to play? Which version is the one people are going to push first? The marketing speaks for itself. I guess for how abrasive I was towards Persona 2, this is just my punishment. Stuck forever in this limbo where I enjoy only the second half of Persona 2, but may not be fully satisfied by a remake either. But for what it's worth, for every shortcoming of Innocent Sin, Eternal Punishment salvaged what was left of it, and well made up for it. While it's not perfect, it doesn't have to be. No perfect game exists, because no one's artistic vision will ever align with everyone's standards. That's how it should be. It stops games from stagnating. Dare I say, while Persona 1 and even Innocent Sin to some small generous extent were respectable in their own rights, Eternal Punishment is where the series started to gain its footing. It showed the potential for the series to become something even greater than it was at the time. That maybe, one day, it could become one of my favorite franchises ever. Nah, that's never gonna happen.